All right, so officially, welcome everybody today. I'm a little bit hoarse. I lost my voice over the weekend, either skiing or yelling at football games. I can't remember which, but hopefully it'll come back a little bit. But want to welcome everybody here and wherever you are. And we're going to be talking about analytics today with our panel of analytics experts. These are my favorite people in all the world who talk about analytics. So, and I've known these guys for a number of years, probably Andrew, you and I go back almost a decade, and Patrick, not too much less than that. And Patrick is bringing along Sjoerd, who's a PhD professor, and all of you have been involved. Maybe you can explain this a little bit as you get into the introductions. Have been involved in teaching one another how to do people analytics and bringing good analytics into the realm of employee experience. So we're going to talk about analytics today, and we're also going to talk about how this impacts what we do with human experience of work. And I just want to also introduce, I've got some of my support team with me here who have helped us put on these webinars. We've got Beth Endecker and Julie Field. And as we get underway, just before we make introductions, I want to understand who all of you are. So if you could just put in the text, in the chat, where you're sitting today, where are you dialing in from? And Sjoerd is just back from Egypt, where he talked at a conference about analytics in Egypt. So that's very cool.
Yeah, but now back in Bunnik, and I don't think anyone outside of the Netherlands knows Bunnik, but it's a great city.
I know Bunnik because I used to commute across the Netherlands, and I probably got a speeding ticket every other day in Bunnik. That was the address where they gave me.
I barely know where it is.
You're from Amsterdam, that's the capital.
All right, so we got Bangalore, awesome. Brooklyn, Columbus, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Breda, New Jersey, another Brooklyn person, another New Jersey person from New Brunswick. And I think Robin's with J&J, right, Robin? And we've got another person in Bangalore. Boy, we've got quite a few people. This is a very extended group. Belgium, Salt Lake City, Utah, Driebergen, and Sao Paulo, Brazil. Wow, we have probably 5 continents represented in this call. This is impressive. I'm really excited to have you all here today. And thank you for making the time to be with us. So we hatched this idea a couple of months ago that we wanted to kick off the year with some really some great webinars with our panel of coaches. Now, just to explain a little bit about how we got this group of people, I've been researching and writing and speaking about employee experience for about the last 7 years, since this whole thing really took off. And these are some of the people that I've met early on when I asked, who does this really well? Who's kind of leading in this? Who are examples? And I've given them many chances to speak and to be in different forums and teach. And so I wanted to share this group as being what I thought was some of the best examples. And I know among you, there are also people who do analytics. So as we go through, if there are any questions you have, either unmute yourself or write in the chat, and let's discuss as we go, because we want to have learning also from this great group of people. So let me share my screen here and we'll get underway. So we have Patrick Cullen, who's head of people analytics and workforce and organization design at ABN AMRO. He leads a team of, what do you have, about 10 or 12 people there, Patrick?
12 people, yes.
Yeah. And Patrick's been doing this for more than 10 years. He's one of the graybeards, so to speak, of people analytics. Andrew Merritt has been working on employee experience. Andrew tells me that he was actually doing this back in the early aughts, early 2000s. So at UBS, he's also a behavioral science expert, but he's one of the best people that you can find that does qualitative. He does text analytics. And so I worked with Andrew in a number of projects, and he's also teaches people analytics teams. Sjoerd is the the most recent one that I know, but Sjoerd is one of the best academics in the field of people analytics, and he teaches a lot of people analytics leaders about data science, about statistics, visualization, modeling. Maybe you can share a little bit about that as you go through, Sjoerd.
I see a former student of mine, even. Joram, good that you're here. Great.
Yeah, awesome. So let's go ahead and start with our agenda. And I just wanted to mention too, also, we will record this and we're also writing some articles about it. So whatever your learning or knowledge acquisition style is, viewing or listening or reading, we've got it. And you can find this on our webpage under the research tab. And we publish articles every week. So if you want to catch up on what's going on there, that's a good place to look at right here under hxwise.com/research. So here's our agenda for today. We want to talk a little bit about how to create a dynamic human experience work data analytics and a continuous listening strategy. So we'll talk in the first section about what is people analytics, how can I effectively use it, what's a good framework or a way of understanding it, and then we'll talk a little bit about how this all applies to the realm of the human experience of work. So with that, I will turn the time over to Sjoerd and Patrick.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think, Sjoerd, I will take this slide first and then I will let you elaborate on it for sure. So what is people analytics? Well, for me, before we dive into this working definition, it's all about curiosity, I guess, right? So I just wanted to understand 10 years ago when I was part of the management team of HR, okay, is it really helping that we put a lot of millions of euros in leadership programs? What does it really do? And how can we investigate what competencies, either from leaders or other people in the organizations, are really driving our organizational goals, like client satisfaction or sales, or maybe more specific within call centers, average handling time. So I was very curious about how do workforce dynamics actually influence organizational goals and KPIs. So the strategic fit is the basis of my curiosity, I guess. And indeed, like Elliot said in the introduction, about 10 years ago, we started this department. And we focused very much first on the advanced analytics. And I always use this working definition. And I say working definition because it's not the definition per se, but we like it. So for us, it's all about creating insights by using data analytics to improve decision making. And some people talk about people analytics like if it's a game changer, every research you do, and the insights will flip over your whole business model within the organization. I don't think that it's true. That's rarely the case, but in every case you do a research, you will find new insights, innovative ideas that you can apply, where you can fine-tune your interventions, where maybe you will find that the people you are hiring are not hired on the right competencies because you do a little bit of deeper research. So it's about having a smarter look at your data, if you will. And data analytics is more than statistics. I always encourage people to do also machine learning, if applicable, and use other methodologies, because I guess based on the question you have or the application you're looking for, sometimes machine learning algorithms support in a better way. For instance, we're now working on vacancy recommendations, pushing vacancy recommendations to individuals. Machine learning algorithms are much more applicable than the classic statistics. And another part of this working definition is creating value. And the value part for me is not only for the organization, of course that's important, but also for the employee. And the example I just gave, vacancy recommendation, is already an example of that. So we're also trying to help our employees having the best possible career they can have within our organization. And we're all used to nudges and recommendations on our iPhone, and this is something what we want to mimic as well within our organization. And I guess that's for me a very practical definition, I guess. Well, that's how we explain it. And to close with, I always say to people, management teams within ABN AMRO, do you want to know how your workforce is impacting your business goals? And nobody says no to that question, of course. And then we shake hands because we have the budgets to do the research, and then we start and we explore in an iterative way where we find a relevant relationship. And maybe Sjoerd, you have also an additional perspective from maybe a more academic view.
Yeah, Patrick and I like to always, challenge each other. By the way, Patrick, who some of you will know, is working on his PhD thesis. So he's completely into the world of academia now as well, and I'm working a lot in practice. But the definition here is basically what we as academics have been doing for decades in the area of HR, right? It's like exploring relationships between the one factor and the other factor, between first one HR factor or people factor and other people factors, and later when the strategic perspective came, it was mainly on focusing what HR things can we do to impact the business. So that is one thing to keep in mind, and I think, Patrick, you will come to that when you show the two walls later on in this session. But in the early days, talking about 10 years ago more or less, when people analytics, HR analytics started to grow and become popular, so to say, it shifted away, or well, no, not say that, but perhaps another branch, the practical branch, was added to it. And now basically organizations do what academics used to do, right? They now have access to data. They have the data in their systems, and they know that it's worth something. They should do something with that. So that's a nice linkage that there is between academia theory and nowadays the practice of analytics. And the second thing I want to address here is that when you look at the one of the fundamental models underlying the human resource field, you know them, right? From Harvard, the Harvard model by Beer and colleagues, and the three dimensions, three subjects that are phrased here in the final sentence, that analytics, and that counts for HR in general as well, right? But people analytics should contribute not only to what the Harvard model is calling organizational effectiveness, right? Every organization only has one goal: to be effective, right? And it can be earning money, but it could also be improving the health of people or improving the safety in society, like the police, for example. So organizational effectiveness. And the second one is individual well-being and societal well-being. So you see the direct copy-paste action, I would say, from such a model. And society is basically the sum of a lot of individuals. And crucial to remember, whenever you do something in HR, whenever you do something in people analytics, when it harms any of these three, it won't work. It won't work, right? It won't have a long-lasting effect. I think that, I don't know who is in control of the slides, but that was my cue. Okay, sure, stop it. We go to the next slide. So, next slide, Patrick.
Wasn't me.
No, but please say that was all I want to say. So indeed, as Patrick said, a working definition. So use also the definition that works in your organization, right? We can have a whole debate on whether you use HR analytics or people analytics or workforce analytics. And to a certain extent, you can have a good discussion on that. It's more than semantics, I would say. But what works well in your organization, perhaps, is your key line of reasoning behind choosing the actual label that you use.
Right. So maybe if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, like Elliot already said in the introduction. But maybe a second topic I want to touch upon is indeed the next slide, Elliot, with the business. What is driving the business, right? How can we effectively use analytics to drive impact within our organization? And in my introduction, I already mentioned a few things, I guess, related to the answer of this question. But it's all about strategic fit. It's all about, when I sit down with a management team, okay, what is your strategy? What are you aiming for? I mean, we can do research on pretty much everything within the company and link HR data to business data, but we want to capacity is also rare in our case, so we want to use it as effective as possible. So we want to have the real strategic sweet spots of an organization and focus on that. So is that retention, is that leadership, is that market growth, whatever. And based on that, so speaking the language of the business in terms of their strategy and what keeps them awake is extremely important. And from there, you start building your organizational analytical questions, so to say. And that's how you come in various use cases, like maybe vacancy recommendations is very much attached by the desire of an organization to increase internal mobility, right? So there's always, it shouldn't be a play field where you have pet projects and all the technical innovations you can use, or we are using it, we are doing it just to showcase. No, it really should help your organization strategically. So that's why we start all our research that we do within the different management teams.
Yeah. So any one of you who starts analytics and starts the analytics journey with a subject in the field of people or HR, you're in the wrong place, right? Or what I mean, the project is in the wrong place. It should always start, it comes across later on in this session as well, but from the right, from the true mission or ambition of your organization. So also always ask yourself the question, what is the core business of us? If you're in a public health organization, right, what is it then? And also right now, if you can mention the top 3 strategic priorities of coming year, that's something you should know before selecting the actual HR or people subject you would dive into with your analytical capacity. Crucial one. By the way, you learn in I think, Elliot, I don't know if you mentioned something about some programs that we're offering, but you will learn about how to unravel that problem. Because if the problem is not clear, and I mean really, really, really clear in depth, you can do 2,500 analytics projects, right? But you don't have the capacity. So it should be really clear on what you put your scarce resources to. Then you add value in the end. Yeah.
And I see a question in the chat. Can I address it, Elliot? Let me do that right away. So Tersu, you're asking, how do I introduce the concept of people analytics when the business is not yet ready to have that conversation? Speaking from a context of readiness and political will, how do I make a case for going the route of analytics when internal competencies to drive the narrative and implement the same are lacking? Well, that's a great question. And you touch actually on a few, I would call them foundational components that you need to create or increase in maturity if you want to do proper analytics. Well, and first and foremost, it's of course finding the right narrative for your management. And not every management team I encountered was as easy as the other. I mean, sometimes it was, oh, clear, let's do it. But others were very skeptical or they didn't get it. And what I normally then do, it's not per se the solution for everything, but what I normally do is say, okay, let's look at a strategy. And I just ask simple question. How do you know that your strategy is actually successful? And how do you know that interventions that you designed to deliver on the strategy are effective or not? And in most cases, they can only provide you with half an answer. And specifically when you dive into the workforce, how do you know and in what way does your workforce help contribute to your business goals? People start to get more silent. And then they will get it that, okay, it's actually silly that we don't know this. So that is just one strategy to talk to and to convince senior management, and at least that worked within our organization. And that's the first thing you need to do. I mean, you can have as much competencies and data scientists and technique within your organization, but if you lack the support from senior management, well, it's not as effective. I'm not sure, Sjoerd, if you have an add-on.
No, I agree. And I think the evidence from, as Elliot said in the beginning, you have been there from the very beginning, Patrick, I would say. And I mean, the very beginning, not of the Earn, but of people analytics. And I would say that what we have seen up to now in the, let's say, 10 to 15 years is that the organizations who lacked this senior management support, they didn't succeed. So for example, if you compare certain banking organizations or retail organizations, Oh, you saw the ones that had this top management support, they succeeded, the other ones didn't. So it was still a playing field for them, a little bit of piloting. So that is relevant. Someone is playing with this machine, so perhaps the mic can be off. But what I want to add is that there should be, it's related to what we discussed about the business, there should be pain, right? You don't get your management to invest in something new or analytics when they don't perceive a pain and they don't perceive that this may be a solution to the pain. So then we're back at unraveling and disentangling this business problem. It should be really clear what the problem is and also what the potential gain is there as a result of analytics. So that is one thing. Pain is related to need. And now I need to think about the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, right? You all remember that. You remember this scene when Leonardo DiCaprio tried to sell a pen, right? And think for yourself right now, how would you sell a pen, a pencil, right? And what many people then do, it's a beautiful, I don't have it here, so otherwise it would be better, but it's a beautiful pencil, right? And we had a TV show where the host even said like, I will kiss it. And another person said, well, the host hold it in his mouth for 2 minutes, you know, but then still there is no need. So what did Leonardo DiCaprio do? Please write something down. Right? A simple example of when there is a need, people will buy the pen. Otherwise, it's nice to have and people won't invest in it. So that is crucial here. And the third one, I would say, also proactively create appetite. It's related to the two previous examples and also Patrick's example. You can, on Friday afternoon, order a few pizzas together with your team, right? Get the data you have. No, you don't have budget, so you can extract all kind of data that you would like to have from the systems, but use the data you have, find out something about the data. It doesn't need to be a rocket science, but it should, you know, create some curiosity. Then you go to your boss, your senior manager, and say, hey, you know what we found out is that male employees, blah, 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 and female employees, you know, that people that aren't promoted, it seems that, hey, that is interesting, but he asks a question, she will ask a question. So, but how does that differ for the various products that we have? Oh, sorry, we don't know that yet. Do you want us to look into that? Yes. And there is your demand. Okay, so proactively creating appetite. I think that is a third, fourth strategy you can use. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Thanks for the question, Terso.
Yeah.
And maybe a last slide from our side, Elliot, because I know you also want to move on to part where Andrew will speak about his expertise. Those are the two walls, I guess. If you can pop up that slide, with the risk of making it too complex, I like these two walls to frame for us what people analytics is and where some of the struggles are. So the walls are here, the thin lines that you see in the middle. And the first wall, maybe it's familiar with a few of them, it's kind of the wall of Boudreau. John Boudreau also talked about this wall. And it's from moving to descriptive analytics, so what is happening, how does this compare to something else, and what do people think based on survey data. It's moving across the wall to more predictive, advanced analytics. And if you can just click, Elliot, maybe once or twice, I think there are some animations in there. That's it, thank you. So the first wall is about improving maturity in methodology. And that's traditionally where people talk about when they're discussing people analytics. And that's fair because advanced analytics is answering different questions. It's answering questions on why things are happening. What is causing what? Can we predict? Can we maybe prescribe? And the tool set to do so in terms of competencies are completely different than the people who do the things before the wall. So that's more the data scientist, right, in the middle. And before the wall, it would be a data analyst. So I guess within ABN AMRO, we kind of jumped over this wall. But now we are encountering a second wall, as we like to say it. And most of our predictive work is kind of ad hoc. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's a big research looking for retention, looking for the NPS on employee experience, looking for sales, sales growth, whatever. But it's in many cases a 3-month research, and we deliver it in a PowerPoint, so to say, right? So it's ad hoc, research-based, and sometimes we do some experiments. But the movement we're making now in the last year or year and a half is to scale it up, to use our insights within ABN AMRO at scale. So that means IT and software and machine learning engineers are getting more and more important. And I guess the vacancy recommendation case I gave in the beginning is an example of that. We have a model where we can take unstructured skill data, structure that to an individual profile on skills, and that structured profile, we can use that for to match it against vacancy text. And then we can do recommendation. We give you the top 5 of the last month. Probably you have skills that we think makes you suitable to move into another position, and that will drive internal mobility and so on and so on. So the second wall, which we are trying to jump now, is more about maturity and deployment. And I also mentioned a few of the use cases, and depending on your use case and your question, you are somewhere else in the world of the two worlds, I guess. So I hope it helps a little bit about how you can frame it. And I think the first wall is moving towards more research-based research, as said on this slide. And the second wall is more about deployment and also design of functionality that you need within your IT infrastructure and system.
Yeah, and final comment from my side, you also see the linkage between, and I'm not a big fan of that, but when you Google on, for example, maturity models in HR analytics or people analytics, you always come across these models that differentiate between descriptive analytics and then, relational analytics or whatever, and then predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics. I think that's a much too narrow view on analytics because it only discusses the analytical perspective of it, right? Not the stakeholder management, not the ethical side and so on. But regardless of that, the prescriptive phase, that is a little bit related to, let's say, the second wall, because in the end, you may want to build something, build IT, build software, which uses the input from analytics, but then automates it to automatically make decisions. For example, which clients to target, which employees to target, and with what kind of messages. How do you compose these messages? Perhaps it's also done automatically. You've all have your timelines completely stuffed with GPT messages, probably. Otherwise, look it up, GPT or ChatGPT. That's like booming now. So see the opportunities of the second wall. I think Patrick and I are a big fan of this development.
So maybe just go back to you, Elliot, for a second to see if there's something else on this part, or you want to move on?
Yeah, we don't have any questions on the chat, but please, if you have anything.
I mean, from my experience, the second wall in some ways is a harder one to go through. And because they are skills and also technical capabilities that usually HR doesn't have access to. So to give you an example, we worked with Patrick a few years ago. It was probably on the sort of first vertical line. Nowadays, I think last year most of my work was around the sort of second, what he would describe as second wall issues. It's around, how do we use clusters of GPUs and get a data pipeline that can balance itself across clusters. These are sort of things that very few HR departments are going to ever have encountered. There will be folks in your technology businesses that can do it, but in my experiences, HR often struggles getting access to those capabilities. And I think at some stage, it's worth also having a sort of a buy versus build conversation there, because the skills needed are so different. But if you've done the first part and know what your research has suggested, you can go into that decision with a lot more certainty that you're going to be making the right decision.
I agree, Andrew, with your beginning of your statement. The second wall is a new and maybe even a bigger complication for HR, and where the second wall was about understanding the competencies you need to do predictive and prescriptive analytics. Now IT and machine learning engineers are becoming our partners, and this is also not yet institutionalized within HR in many organizations. So it's a dependency that we need to manage.
Sorry, because I want to say it's going fast. So don't fall asleep, because this is moving faster than the previous 10 years is my view. So I see organizations already implementing that, and since we are all trying to get the same talents, the same people from very often still the same region or the same country, you better start with it. And of course we say that with every new development, but I won't risk it here.
Okay. Why don't we move on? So the next slide, why don't we talk a little bit about the analytical process and how that works?
Sure, maybe just briefly, I guess we put in this slide because roughly you have like 4 stages, right? So you have a problem definition, which should have that strategic fit I was talking about. And once you agree what your goal is of your research, then you start collecting the relevant data, you start cleaning it. And once you arrive in the analysis and modeling, already 80% of the time you will spend on your product is done. So only the 20%, 30%, I guess, is allocated at analysis modeling, which is very iterative, and visualization and insights and sharing, telling your story to your stakeholders. If you can push the button once more, Elliot, please. Yes, maybe in a little bit more. Just I have way too many animations in the slides. Please continue. Yes. So these are a little bit more of the details, right? So in the beginning, determine your business problem. I'm not going to repeat it. That will define your use case. And what I just wanted to add is that the data collection and cleaning and the analysis and modeling is kind of an iterative thing. You do this with stakeholders and with functional experts as well, who are actually working on a daily basis on business data, for instance. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of a flavor of the process. And there's a lot of stories and examples to provide based on this process, but this is kind of a high-level overview for us.
And important to notice that, like Elliot, you said, the analytical process, and let's all be careful with the words we use, because as you can see, the analytical part is only a small part, right? There's a lot around it, which is perhaps even more important in some cases. So keep that in mind. And indeed, many examples, many best practices and pitfalls. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about moving on, what a continuous listening strategy looks like. So now we're shifting a little bit more into the realm of HX or employee experience. Who wants to take that one first? I know, for example, Patrick, you've done an interesting way of mapping this onto our HX playbook and going through the different stages from exploration and research through to empathizing and defining, through to ideation and prototyping.
So maybe I think you have those 2 slides as well, Elliot. So again, a lot of animation, so feel free to push them through. So we have a kind of a framework which runs every quarter and sometimes every half year, depending on the size of a problem. But if you want to know what employees are thinking, you have to start listening. It's as simple as that. And listening is not one thing. It's not one survey or one system. It's a combination of things. So at Start Listening, on the top of the slide, you see that we have several surveys: employee experience, employee engagement, pool surveys based on business lines who want to know additional stuff. We have an employee community where people have more of a qualitative discussion. And of course, we use transactional data. What are people asking in our Contact HR center, for instance? But it's only signaling, in our case, what people think, not why per se they think all the things they do. So number 2 for us is love the problem. So we're collecting data, we're combining it with other data, and we do our analytics. And in some cases, we deep dive through service design. And once we understand the problem much better, and we have a sort of vision for a solution, then we're going to try, and we're not afraid to experiment. For instance, when we learned that the design of our office floors were not that effective, we introduced the yellow concept, which is at the bottom, the 4th one, redesigned by listening to employees. What do they need? Which is also very relevant again in the time of hybrid working where we are now. And maybe the next slide, I think it's on the next slide, is if you look at service design, then what I just discussed is maybe the first diamond that you see here. So a little bit top down with analytical use of topic detection, where Andrew trained us indeed. So thanks for that again, Andrew. But understanding what people talk about. But the second diamond and the third diamond are much more related to, okay, so what is the exact problem and can we find a solution? And you need different analytical techniques. Definitely you can use quantitative, so high and low mapping, for instance. But I guess providing context to what people say. If people say retention is a problem, then based on interviews and focus groups, or Delphi studies, which is a combination, sort of a variation of focus groups, more staged, you can find much more rich data on why people think what they are thinking. And then you can use that in your problem solution and move to your solution. I thought I saw a question popping up. What is high-low mapping? Good question. High-low mapping is, for instance, if people complain about a process, let's say onboarding, what are the different moments that matter in that process of onboarding where people are happy with or complain about? And if they're happy, it's a high, and if they're complaining about it, it's a low. And so you find out on a more granular level what is happening within a specific process, for instance, onboarding, but can be any HR process. I forgot to look at any additional questions maybe. Are there any more questions, Elliot, I should address, or want to move on?
I'm polluting the chat, so no worries. Yeah.
I think we've captured it, and also Short is answering some questions. But please, if you do have anything, pop in, because we're moving pretty fast here. All right, so let's move on to the next one. Where do I find existing data? I think one of the most challenging parts about doing HX research is where do you start and what do you use? So Andrew, I'm going to turn this one over to you.
Yeah, and you probably see a very, very close similarity here with what Patrick's just been describing. We have a very similar sort of framework. A lot of our work is right at the, as Patrick mentioned, at the first diamond, but we find that there's a lot of data that already have within organizations that can inform, especially AX activities. I wrote an article sort of second half of last year, or in the summer last year, about using employee survey data to prioritize employee experience or HX type activities. We like going into the comments, and with most of our clients who've got tens of thousands of employees, we're dealing with a large volume of data there. But we find that within, although you may think that you've been asked a question about, I don't know, what's good about working here or what can we do to improve it, a lot of the comments there are about experiences, about things that are working, about things that aren't working. And especially when you start linking that with some sort of demographic information, are these people engaged? Have they got a strong intent to stay? Are they in your logistics business? All that type of information. We can start to identify quite a lot of patterns within the data. It's very much treating the text as qualitative information, but with with the sort of modern machine learning techniques, you can process this data in a very simple way, or a very effective way, rather than given the scale. One of the things that we've been doing recently, which makes a big improvement on this, is just categorizing the answers in the sentence about what the employee is trying to do. So are they describing an experience that they've had? Are they making a suggestion for change? Are they just making a statement or a vision? You know, there are a bunch of sentences which often link several of those together. So I'm experienced X and it's going to cause me to do Y. Those are vital. And just to start to separate those comments out can give you great insight. Elliot and I have done this on numerous occasions, and we always find some interesting areas to explore. I think my expertise is that often it's the very junior parts of the organization who are struggling with things that often more senior people think are already sorted. So, training and onboarding, especially if you're at the junior ranks, is universally a problem that we've seen, especially technical training and business specific processes. As you go on, so we can use that to identify. Elliot, no, the last slide, please. Can we go back? As we go on, we can move from the data on there into more what can we do to sort it. And as was mentioned, we can get much more granular information by using much stronger qualitative methods. We've been using a lot of techniques, often video. I remember at UBS presenting a stack of hard data and stats to a senior executive, and then showing a video of somebody struggling using our HR systems, and the data was generating a lukewarm video reception, and within 10 seconds after the video it was like, yes, we need to go and sort this out, what can we do? So those qualitative methods are really, really powerful. And I think the final point, which Patrick had only looked at but we're really keen on, is when you're redesigned a process or a journey, then to at that stage think about how are you going to build measurement into that step. So, doing surveys at certain points in the employee life cycle is something we're really, really passionate about. You want to take the next question, Alice? In terms of the difference between HX research and some other approaches on analytics, I think this is to some degree a bit of a granularity, but we think that a lot more of the process on HX is qualitative by nature, and therefore it's far more iterative than a sort of a linear process. So, the way that I was taught to do an analysis was this sort of linear process, albeit, as Elliot said, there's certainly parts where it's significantly iterative, but I would push that iteration even further than Patrick potentially mentioned. And I think certainly on qualitative data, you're often using the exploration and discovery stage, not to solve a problem, but to also to identify potential problems and potential challenges. And it's quite often, if you look at qualitative work, where the hypothesis that you develop will often come through the discovery stage of the data as well. So the whole of this process being inherently much more qualitative because it's about people's perceptions, it becomes more iterative. And I think the trick as an analyst here is to know when to stop and start testing some of those hypotheses rather than just spending all your time exploration. I'd be interested to hear what the others' perspective of this.
One thing that triggers me a lot, Andrew, is the word hypothesis, and it already implies that there is a test to be done. And that is one approach, and a very, very prominent approach. At the same time, very often students come to me and they say, I want to do a research like this and that, and I want to do interviews, or I want to do that. But the method follows the question, not the other way around. So in some cases, you don't want to test hypothesis. And the great example, I think, always is that story about it's a fictive story, perhaps, but about the supermarket who placed the beer next to the diapers, because then the gentleman would also buy the beer when they were sent to buy the diapers. You could have never made a hypothesis up front, assuming or anticipating that the sales of beer would increase if you put it next to the diapers. So important to think about that for all participants, that the method follows the problem, and then we are back at the always the initial stage. What do you want to solve?
Mm-hmm.
Patrick, you're on mute.
Well, you all
Okay, so we've got about
need to
7
say
minutes.
that I don't have any additional remarks.
Okay.
You were talking. Oh, you don't have any additional remarks. Elliot, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say we have about 7 minutes just to do a little time check. So I know we've got a couple more slides we want to do.
Exactly.
But maybe we could go on to this one, Andrew, because we saw this article this last couple, I think it was 2 days ago. This is really cool work. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so I mean, this is visualization, and there is certainly what I was trying to do here was to just sort of highlight the things that people are talking about in this data. And for us, we think of topics and ideas within text as hierarchical. So this was the sort of the highest two levels of that hierarchy. But the more fundamental part, if I'm thinking about visualization, it's very much about thinking of who the audience is and thinking of what their needs are. And when I'm teaching visualization, I spend a lot of time talking about adapting sort of the approaches that I learned on communication planning, about stakeholder mapping and needs analysis, and doing that into visualization. And then often for audiences, it's about thinking about that storyline that they're. As an analyst, you'll develop an awful lot more visualizations through the process of your analysis than you ever want to throw in front of the audience, and probably it's a scarcity there. But I think the importance of having a communication map and an analysis and stakeholder map is that it's sort of, if you then think, well, what's the best way of doing this? Often a dashboard isn't the right way of doing it. Right? So I'm really, really keen on using dashboards for understanding the data myself, for interrogating it. But I feel that, certainly if you're presented to senior execs, you wouldn't give them a dashboard. You would identify what you want to say and say it. And I think, the point of this was there are lots and lots of different ways of visualizing data, but if you know the message that you're trying to get across, it becomes an awful lot easier to pick the relevant approach. And our view is that dashboards are really, really useful, but not universally useful.
Super. So thank you very much, Andrew. And we have about 5 minutes left. We've barely scratched the surface today. So since we've just kind of teased at a lot of these topics, there's a lot more that this group could share. I want to spend the last few minutes talking about where can you get more information about this? Where can you find more from this group and about analytics in general? So I want to talk a little bit about some of the programs that we have. Maybe Patrick and Sjoerd, you could tell us about these two. We have a foundations course, and then we have a transformations course in analytics. What's the difference between these two, and who should be interested in the first one here in foundations? Who's this for?
Feel free to add, Sjoerd, of course. I think the first one, the foundation, is about the phenomenon of people analytics. So do you want to know what it is and what value you can get from doing analytical research within your organization, then this one is the best course to do and to apply for. And during this course, you will also learn how to build your own use case that helps you kickstart kind of your analytical practice in your organization itself. So you will be working on via discussion and micro learnings and presentation and exercises to build your own use case, looking at strategy. Okay, so what is the organizational question? What is the analytical question? Where should I find the data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very practical but comprehensive course, I guess, on how to do people analytics. Sure, do you have any, did I miss something?
You're on mute, Short.
But if you could read my lips, I said it's a great course and a lot of fun. And completely, you're completely confused after every session, but that's a good thing.
And I guess the second one, which is more about building the practice. Is that another slide as well, Elliot, or is it on this one? And is this one?
Yeah.
That's how do you transform as an organization from starting with a people analytic practice and bringing it to maturity. So it's much more what I've been doing in the last 10 years within ABN AMRO, right? Starting with hiring people, understanding the technology within the organization, understanding the strategic topics, aligning with stakeholders, and so on. And I guess this course is helping you to do a sort of a maturity check in the beginning. So where are we on all these foundational topics? And what transformation map should we build to get where we need to be? So you also define your own ambition level. So, and again, here you also, we will be building that transformation map, T-map, how we call it, during the 5 modules, providing you with actually a sort of a tech approach when you go back to your organization to build this practice.
Yeah, and I think this is very much related to the question that was posed earlier, right? Management is not listening, or my organization, I want, but my organization doesn't want. The combination of what we do in these 2 courses, and not about the course, but what you do there is, on the one hand, you should build these use cases, build these solutions. But on the other hand, the context should help you to make the effect of these use cases long lasting. Well, so 1 use case, the second course is on the context, creating the context. That's it.
Is that completely clear?
Oh, I see Julie posted a link to the programs in the chat. Excellent. And also feel free to contact us if you have questions on what it can bring you. And one thing, that's what I wanted to mention, what it can bring you is, right, you now do it on your own. By the way, I always recommend to join together with some relevant stakeholders. I made a comment in the chat that the approach should always be ideally a multidisciplinary approach, right? You as an HR person, for example, cannot make an impact without people who know the data, without some business managers, without whatever. So crucial that you organize it yourself or that you join forces in such a program. If you don't, you can still use everything you learned and repeat it in your own organization after the program, right? And get the right stakeholders on board. So it enables you to become the one leading and driving the change in your organization.
I think we lost Elliot in the call. So I just want to check with Julie or Beth. Do you have the slide pack as well, just to highlight also the program where Andrew is involved?
Elliot is back.
Elliot is back.
Yep.
Good.
Yeah, so, and by the way, while we're talking about this, if you want more information, it's on our website, edcheckwise.com, but it's good to hear this explanation from the people who will be teaching this.
And I'm covering one on the continuous listening and some of the techniques they're doing there. It will be focusing a lot more also on this, bringing in this sort of qualitative approaches into the the sort of more data part, and to think about not only when you should be looking at data from systems, for example, about processes, but also how are you looking at perceptions, and to think about some of those techniques. We've got a really interesting session, which I won't be leading at the end, where Elliot's brought in an expert on user experience. One of my starting points in employee experience, I came to it via UX. And the great thing about technologies like Zoom are that you now can do these things at a fraction of the cost that I used to do when I had to fly a team of researchers around the globe to accurately get responses from people with different cultures and different views. So the UX part is something I'm really glad that we're uncovering there. It's super useful. It's rare that we see it being used within HR departments. And this sort of, I think on this course you're going to be learning about some of those sort of new novel approaches that you might not have thought about, many of which Patrick mentioned on his slide as well.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody being with us today. And we did have a question also, I noticed a little earlier from Minnie. I don't know if you addressed that while I was away, but she asked for an example of something. I don't know if you're able to look at the, where's my chat here?
Yeah, is there a rule of thumb as far as guiding principles for cost per capita expense? Andrew, you would really like to answer that one, right?
I mean, our view, and the one thing that they didn't mention is that when we were doing more detailed people analytics projects at the back, we, at the beginning of our time, before we started focusing more and more on text, we always used to build what I was going to call as an economist, a loss function. So we'd look at the benefits and the economic value that you could get out of a decision, and socialize those values. So if you're looking at, I remember an example with a big insurer where we were able to use that to persuade them that it wasn't attrition that they were that they needed to focus on, but the cost of attrition, and the recommendations to reduce the cost were not necessarily the same as reducing the overall attrition. I remember when challenged by a rather skeptical CHRO, that all he wanted to do is to reduce the cost. I said, well, your easiest, the attrition, I said the easiest way you could do that is being better at retaining poor performers. And it was a flippant mark, but it was one that indicated that actually, get him to think about what it was. So is there a sort of a rule of thumb? I don't know. If you need to focus on the parts where the difference between a good decision and an average decision is a large value. And that's either because you're making that decision a lot of times, or because there is a big difference between those two things. And one simple way of doing it is to look at what's the effect if we make this decision right, and what's the effect if we make this average, and what are we doing there. So you'll find that it'll guide you to the places where you're going to make the most impact. And our experience is, if you find a high impact area, you'll never struggle with budget. I remember Salesforce work in Asia, suddenly 100,000 Swiss franc budgets appeared out of nowhere because the payback was going to be so much more than that.
All right, we're out of time. We do have one other question for me about sharing a specific example of how you use storytelling to share the data. That one is something I think we could even post about or share some articles, because I know this has been talked about many times from all of this group here. So just in closing, I want to thank you again for being here today. And watch this space, watch our website for articles about this topic, because we'll write about this and we'll add a little bit, we'll embellish some things that we didn't have time to address today, and encourage you to look at these programs as a way to access more information and build some skills around analytics and how this intersects with human experience at work. Thank you, and best wishes to everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.